So tonight's program is about science meeting music. And we have two OSU scientists with us tonight. And they went and met with the group of 5th grade students from Richmond Elementary that are performing tonight. Those scientists are Dr. Kristen Baum from the Department of Integrative Biology. Thank you, Dr. Baum. And Dr. Mark Fishbein from the Department of Plant Biology, Ecology, and Evolution. Thank you, Dr. Fishbein. Tonight's program is going to intersperse original music with short talks by the scientists. So it's going to be a wonderful experience for you, we hope. Okay, tonight's program would not have been possible without Monty Harper. Monty is a songwriter, artist in residence, and he hosts Born to Do Science, which is a kids' science program that I have occasionally here at Stillwater Public Library. So, Monty, thank you.
Hello. Thank you. I'd just like to say before we get started that it's been my absolute privilege and pleasure to work with these kids. I've been working with 12 5th graders at Richmond Elementary School, and this is a GT class, and these kids are brilliant and creative and fun, and they wrote these songs with my help, so it was really all the ideas, all the effort that went into it, that was them. I helped them over the finish line a little bit, but I was just helping them write the songs that they were trying to write. And so when you hear the songs, it all came from the kids. And I wanted to introduce their teacher. This is Carrie Henderson, and she takes a lot of the credit for how great those kids are, I'm sure. So, and then we're going to bring the kids out.
Yes, at this time we're going to have all of the children walk out and introduce themselves for you, and then they'll go back, and then we'll start the program.
All right. Get ready to meet some amazing kids.
I'm Emma Clements.
I'm JC Fallenkamp.
I'm Payden Porter. I'm Ian Wanaville. I'm Gabrielle Sucrose.
I'm Andrew Morans.
I'm Katie Croft.
I'm Autumn Lindsley.
And this is Audrey Fox.
All right. So let's go back that way, and we'll get our first group ready to sing. There we go. Oh, the kids did the artwork for these two. Alright. So this song is called Just Eat It, and I'll be playing the part of the Daddy Butterfly, and these are my little caterpillars. Here we go. Yes, you do, honeys, please don't plead.
Why, Daddy? Defenses are disgusting.
Baby caterpillars, please eat your milkweed. Just eat it.
Do we have to?
You have to.
Please don't make us.
Have courage.
Just the thought makes our stomachs ache.
Just eat it.
It has hair and glue. Ew! The glue's too sticky, icky. And all that hair gives us a scare. It's so rough and prickly.
Just eat it.
Do we have to?
You have to.
Please don't make us.
Have courage.
Just the thought makes our stomachs ache.
Just eat it.
It tastes bitter. Ew! It's poison. don't make us
have courage.
Just the thought makes our stomachs ache.
Just eat it. You have to eat this tasty treat. At least you have to try. If you don't get enough nutrition, I'm afraid you're going to die. Just eat it.
Do we have to?
You have to.
Please don't make us
Have courage.
Just the thought makes our stomachs ache. But I guess we'll have to eat it. Crunch. Delicious.
I told you so.
Wow, that was really cool. So, yeah. Okay, so you guys can hear me back there? So, yeah, that was really great. So I'm Mark Fishbein. I'm a botanist in the Department of Plant Biology, Ecology, and Evolution. And I want to follow up that amazing song by telling you a little bit about those disgusting plants that the baby monarchs are afraid to eat, but which they really have to eat. So first I want to explain just a little bit about why the monarchs have to eat these milkweeds. So if we look at this happy adult monarch here, it needs to find a milkweed plant, like this one that it's landed on, and it is going to lay an egg. That egg will hatch into a little caterpillar. And if you've ever seen monarch caterpillars, you might not think that that looks like a monarch caterpillar. So when they first hatch, they're very tiny and kind of nondescript, but then they eat milkweed and they get bigger until they get into a size that's maybe a little bit more familiar to you that have seen monarch caterpillars. And after they've eaten a lot of milkweed and they grow up to be big, happy caterpillars, they make this amazing structure, pupate, and metamorphose into this beautiful adult butterfly. So the monarch's amazing, but the monarch is nothing without milkweed. It has to eat milkweed. What's interesting is that the monarch is just one example of many things that have to eat milkweed. So monarchs are not the only things that have evolved to rely entirely on milkweeds to survive, or at least partially. So they range from yucky aphids to pretty interesting little caterpillars, from moths, not a butterfly but a moth, and then bugs and beetles. And some of these things can eat a whole variety of milkweeds. The beetle is pretty amazing because each beetle species has to eat one milkweed species. And so when we talk about milkweed, it's easy to think, oh, there's just one kind of milkweed plant. But what I want to continue to talk about is the diversity of milkweeds. There's actually 400 species of milkweeds around the world. There's almost 150 of them in North and South America, and there's even more in Africa. And what do these things look like? Well, if you've seen milkweeds, you might think they look mostly like this, but there's actually a tremendous amount of diversity in the hundreds of milkweed species. Some of them are quite small. So that plant is about the size of a 5 peso piece that's in there for scale. That's the entire plant, including all of its flowers. They can be shrubs, and they can even be these weird desert plants that have no leaves whatsoever. In fact, next week, my grad students and I are going to Arizona to look for that milkweed, and we'll be observing that in the field. So milkweeds are diverse, and monarchs eat many of these species. It's actually not very well known which species they eat and which ones they don't eat, which ones are essential for their survival in different parts of their range. Milkweed, or monarchs in Arizona might not eat the same thing as monarchs in Oklahoma or monarchs in New York. In fact, we know that they don't. And you are lucky enough to live in Oklahoma where there's a tremendous amount of milkweed diversity. So each one of these pictures is a different species of milkweed. 24 different species of milkweeds live in Oklahoma. We know about a couple of them being really important as food for monarchs, and we know very little about 80% of them in terms of how much monarchs use them and whether they prefer to eat them over other species or not. So those of you that have kids, or if you are a kid, there's plenty to be learned about milkweeds and monarchs, and there's a lot that we don't know. So maybe someday you'll be the person that figures that kind of stuff out.
Oh, questions? You want to take questions now?
Sure. Question?
Okay, does anyone have a question for Dr. Fishbein? Yes, sir.
What is it about milkweed that helps in that developmental stage?
What is it about milkweed that helps in that developmental stage?
So the most insects, most butterflies need the same basic kinds of nutrients, and they eat a variety of different kinds of plants basically to get the same kinds of nutrients. And so it's not so much that they're getting anything in particular from the milkweeds that they couldn't get from another plant, but they've evolved to specialize on only eating that kind of plant. In fact, you can force monarchs, if they have nothing else to eat things that are not milkweeds. They don't develop very well because they're so finely tuned in their physiology to make use of milkweeds. But it's there's nothing, as far as I'm aware, that's essentially required for their development that's in milkweeds that they couldn't get from something else.
Does it have a protein component?
Yeah, absolutely. There's carbohydrates, proteins, fats, everything that you or a monarch would need is in the milkweed plant.
Do we have one more question? Okay, we'll move into the next song.
So you might notice that Emma's up here again, and we don't always have the same kids singing as the kids who wrote the songs. The kids who wrote the songs are listed on the screen, and some of them didn't want to sing, and some others wanted to sing more than once, so we just let the ones that wanted to sing. I'm just talking to cover myself, turning on my microphone. All right, are we all on? Emma, say hi.
Hi.
Autumn, say hi.
Hi.
And Jesse, say hi. No. I keep going. Payden, say hi.
Hi.
All right. I think we're all on. You guys ready? All right, here we go.
It was a lovely day. I was getting ready for flight. Then the human started a fire, and it burned all through the night. Why are you burning my house? Why are you burning my house? I have a need for milkweed. I have a need for milkweed. I
next speaker will be answering that question, why did you burn my home?
So Mark talked some about the different milkweed species we have in Oklahoma, and one of the more common ones is the green milkweed, which is the one that's pictured here, and it's the one that's most common, and it's thought to be probably the second most important milkweed for monarchs. And so the first one would be common milkweed that's up in the upper Midwest. We have a little bit here, but not much, and so that's the one they would be using when they're breeding during the summer, but when they're coming up through Texas and Oklahoma in the spring, and then coming back through in the fall, this would be the most common species that they would encounter. Okay, I'll talk a little louder. Okay, and so most of the areas where we would find this milkweed are grasslands or prairies, and there's not much native grassland that's left today. So there's been a lot of habitat loss and fragmentation, and a lot of what's left is managed, for example, for livestock production or occasionally hay. And so if you don't have some type of management, a lot of times we'll have brush encroachment. So this is a red cedar pictured here. And so historically, a lot of the grasslands and prairies would have burned on a somewhat regular basis. And so that fire would have removed a lot of the brushy plants that would be coming in. So red cedar in particular would be one of the species that's of concern in Oklahoma. So if you don't have fire or some type of management, you'll end up not having a grassland or a prairie, but instead something that looks quite different. So you would lose all of that habitat for monarchs and milkweed. And this is a picture that shows an area before it was burned and an area after, so it's an aerial view. It's not the greatest of pictures, but a lot of the smaller red cedars would be removed by fire. So if you let them get too big, it's going to be a problem, and you'd have to use some kind of mechanical removal. But fire will come through and open up that grassland habitat and continue to provide good habitat for monarchs, as well as lots of other wildlife that depend on grasslands. And so this is a monarch that is laying an egg, if you can see on that plant, on a green milkweed plant that just emerged. So this is from some of OSU's research sites where they burn different areas in the spring and in the summer. This particular one was burned in the summer. And so if we think about when we have monarchs in Oklahoma, we'll have them in the spring. They'll usually arrive right at the end of March or early April. They'll be here through maybe June, and then we won't see them again until mid-August. And so if we think of when fires would have normally occurred, now a lot of times when people do prescribed fire, they'll do it during the dormant season, so the cool season when we wouldn't have monarchs. But historically, there would have been fires during the growing season as well. So in this case, the fire was applied in mid-July, and so the milkweed grew back and was there as a host plant for the monarchs that came back in mid-August. And so a lot of times we think about monarchs breeding in this area, laying eggs, reproducing in the spring, but this shows all the different sites that we see in August and September. So lots of activity during that time of year as well. And so these monarchs, depending on when those eggs are laid, will have time to join the migration and move south as well. And so this is a picture, actually if you go north on Perkins Road, up near where you would get on the turnpike, that shows the green milkweed in the spring. So this picture I took in early May of last year. So you can see all the light green, the pale flowers in the background. That's the green milkweed in bloom. But then when we go back to that same area, later in the year, we're not going to find much milkweed. And so the milkweed, once it produces the seed pods and those open up, a lot of times the plant will kind of die back. And so it'll come back the next year, but it will die back for this year, and we won't see much of it. So we'll have much less milkweed available in the mid-August breeding period than we would earlier in the year. But when you have fire or some other type of disturbance that removes the above ground portion of the plants, they'll come back, and so we'll have milkweed for monarchs in the fall as well. And so this is the same site I was just highlighting. I didn't line up the pictures perfectly, but you can get an idea of how they match up. So again, certainly depending on the timing of fire, it could not be that great for if there happens to be caterpillars present, but overall it means there's going to be habitat for them into the future. So it helps keep that habitat open, it helps the milkweed regenerate and come back, and it's great for nectar resources and everything else as well. And I would be happy to take a question.
So when's the best time to burn then to increase milkweed?
Well, I don't know about increasing milkweed, but certainly, kind of maintaining populations or providing milkweed in the fall. Mid-July, we know, works well. The question was when is good to burn for monarchs, and so mid-July is the timing that we know works well for having milkweed grow back and be there come August when they come back to the area. And then, certainly fire during the spring, there'll be milkweed available during that time period as well, in particular if you burn in March, early in the year. Yes?
Is burning necessary?
The question was, is burning necessary? So you need some kind of management to be able to maintain that open grassland habitat. So fire is what would have normally occurred on the landscape. So certainly if you've got the red cedar that are coming in, if you let them get too large, you'd have to do mechanical removal. And so fire is a efficient method for maintaining the grassland habitat.
But if you have a milkweed and no encroachment, it'll still be there in August?
It would depend on the weather conditions. So if it happened to be a really wet year, it might be, but otherwise, once it sets seed, a lot of times those plants will just die back. So historically, if you think about when wildfires would have occurred, there would have been parts of Oklahoma where there would be milkweed available, and then others where there wouldn't be. And that would vary from year to year. Yes?
So there also be an effect on grazing along with the fire at different points of the growing season?
So there's definitely a fire-grazing interaction, and so cattle will tend to focus their grazing on the most recently burned areas. They tend to avoid milkweed, at kind of low to moderate stocking rates, so it's usually not an issue. But that would have been what would have occurred historically. And so then you kind of think about over time, areas that you had a fire, and then the cattle selectively graze those areas. Those would be less likely to burn the next year because they wouldn't have the fuel load. But then other areas that hadn't would have the fuel load to burn. So you do have a fire grazing interaction. So the question was, how did I get interested in this research? And I guess I originally had gone out, in particular thinking about fire in monarchs, to the OSU Research Range, which is southwest of town a little bit, and I was interested in native bees, and so I was looking at the native bee community. So there's big differences in the plant community depending on if they burn in the spring or the summer, so I was looking at that interaction between the native bees and the different burning regimes. And then when you're out there in August and they burn, the milkweed comes back, and it's one of the main things that comes back where there's kind of vertical structure. It's really noticeable, it'll bloom again. And so then we got really interested in monarchs and started the monarch study as well.
So I'll give a little bit more explanation for this next song. This is about the relationship between milkweeds and monarchs over the span of millennia. And it's about how they evolved together. We're going to have two soloists doing the song. So Katie's going to sing as the milkweed, and JC is going to play the part of the butterfly in the second verse. And Emma is back to help us out. All right. Are all our lights green?
Yes.
Yes. So we're on. All right. Ready? Let's give Katie a big round of applause. much.
Okay, again, that was amazing. I have not heard such a clearly enunciated explanation of coevolutionary pressures ever. Those are some smart kids. So I want to just elaborate a little bit on what they were telling you about. So first of all, you're a plant, you don't want to get eaten. And what can you do about it? You're just sitting there, eggs are being laid on you, caterpillars are emerging, you're stuck there. So plants evolve defenses, and you've heard about some of the defenses that the milkweeds have from the kids. They're milky because they have latex. They actually have liquid rubber in their tissues, and if you bite into them, go ahead. You can try it if you want to. Don't really do it because they're actually toxic, but if you do that, white gunk comes out, and if you're a small insect with a big rush of liquid rubber flowing out on you, not a great thing to try to eat. They are covered with plant hairs or trichomes in some species as well. It's hard to get around those things if you're, doesn't seem like much to a big human, but to a little caterpillar getting around a forest of hairs to try to get to the tissues below to eat is not easy. Some of the species are covered with a slick wax, and it's actually so slippery that it's hard for insects to crawl on the leaves. And then they've got the toxins, these things called cardenolides. Really bad news. Because milkweeds are so bitter tasting, you probably have a hard time eating enough to really seriously hurt yourself, but you could. They're very, very toxic compounds. So the plants are just sitting there. They're evolving these defenses to try to protect themselves against nasty things like monarch butterflies. But the monarchs are not just sitting there in terms of evolutionary time. They're evolving their ways of countervailing the defenses. And so on the left there, we see a monarch caterpillar cutting into the base of the leaf, the stem of the leaf, in order to let the latex bleed out of the leaf, and then they can feed on the leaf once the latex is bled out. So that's pretty clever. And then that little monarch on the right there, what's that doing? It's shaving the hairs off the surface of that really hairy milkweed so that it can get down into where the leaf tissue is. So both of those behaviors take time and effort. If they didn't have to get around those defenses, they could probably eat faster, grow faster, and be more successful, but they're still able to get around this. And one of the most remarkable adaptations that monarchs have is that once they eat those tissues, they ingest all those toxic cardenolides, and they're not defeated by them, they're not poisoned by them. They can keep them stashed away, and then when they metamorphose into adult butterflies, they can use them as their own defense against the things that want to eat them. So not only are they not being harmed by the chemicals, they're using them to their own benefit. So they're really evolving. They've really evolved quite a bit to be well adapted to milkweeds. Now, the children suggested that maybe they're not just foes, maybe they're friends as well. And in fact, milkweeds are insect pollinated. They must have insects come to the flowers and take pollen from one plant to another in order to make seeds. And here we see a bumblebee on a milkweed flower. It's sticking its tongue up into a cup-like structure that's full of nectar. So the milkweed likes insects, in a sense. It produces nectar to try to attract insects that will come move its pollen around. And if we look on the foot of that same bee on the right, you can see those yellow bags stuck to the feet of that bumblebee. Those are bags of milkweed pollen. So as that bumblebee is feeding on the flowers, it's pulling pollen out, and then it's going to move it to another plant and pollinate a flower on another plant, providing a service to the milkweed, an essential service to the milkweed. There will be no more milkweeds if there's no pollination to make seeds, and they require insects to do that for them. And all kinds of insects like milkweed flowers and like to drink nectar and are moving pollen around for the milkweed. So there's another couple of bees on this slide, and then look at that. Milkweeds covered with monarch butterflies. So the monarchs could in fact be friends of milkweeds in terms of moving pollen around and helping them pollinate and make offspring. So it might be, some kind of trade-off between little caterpillars eating the milkweeds, but adult monarchs helping out the milkweeds to make more milkweeds. Everybody might win in the long run. But I can't help but tell you that when I was a graduate student studying the pollination of milkweeds in Arizona, the monarchs were terrible pollinators. So on balance, they turned out to be more foes than friends. But I have hope for the monarchs that maybe someday they'll be more friendly to milkweeds. So thanks. Any questions?
What milkweed is that in those photos?
Okay, the big photo on the right with lots of flowers, that's swamp milkweed. That's native to eastern Oklahoma and grows really, really well in Stillwater. It's a great garden plant. The one on the left is bloodflower or tropical milkweed. That's not native to this area, but it also grows really well here, although it won't survive many of the cold winters, so you have to keep replanting it. But you can grow both of these quite easily here.
Thank you.
All right, thanks again.
Time that just about right. All right. So this is our final song. And it's called Effective Detective. And this was inspired by Kristen. And I'm not sure if this is exactly what she does, but with the parasites. But in the song, the detective is trying to figure out what's killing the monarchs. So it's a murder mystery. All right. Are we ready?
Okay, so I'm going to talk kind of generally about what some of the issues are for monarchs, and I will get to parasites at the very end, but I wanted to talk about some of the other issues before I get there. So you might have heard the counts from the overwintering grounds. They measured the acreage or the area that's covered by monarchs every year. And so this year was actually better than the past 4 years. So if you can look over here, so it's back to what it was maybe about 5 years ago. So the big issue, why there was so much concern, is we had these years where it was really, really low, and there were a lot of factors that kind of contributed to those really low numbers that we saw. And so this would be down in Mexico, the fir trees where the monarchs overwinter. And so essentially, all of this orange here in the background is, millions and millions of monarchs in the trees. And so there has been concern over deforestation on the overwintering grounds. So when they cut down the trees and the areas where the monarchs overwinter, obviously that's going to be a big problem. But they have made lots of efforts in recent years to try to protect those areas. And so another issue we already talked about was milkweed availability. And so monarchs certainly need milkweed to reproduce. And so a lot of the concern for milkweed has been for the upper Midwest, so in particular the Corn Belt, so this region kind of here. So on the summer breeding grounds, a lot of those areas are corn and soybean fields. And they developed the Roundup-ready corn and soybeans, so they're able to keep the weeds out of those fields. And so they've removed a lot of the milkweed from that area. And there's been studies where they've looked and looked at how much has been lost. But the common milkweed is a much bigger plant than a lot of the ones we have here. So that is a big issue as well. But we know a lot less about how much milkweed we have in Oklahoma and Texas. So that's been one of the big pushes recently, is to try to figure out how much we have and where it's at and where we need more. And this is a close-up view of green milkweed, the one that we have, the most common one around here. So the other thing that monarchs are going to need during the spring and fall, as well as during the summer, is nectar. And so that's another big push, is to look at nectar availability. So certainly some of the years where we've had drought years, there's been really low nectar resources available as well. And so that gets us to the parasites and predators of monarchs. And so if we think about how many monarch eggs survive all the way to be an adult butterfly, it's a really low number. So less than 10%, and depending on kind of the season and the location, it might be as low as 5 or 6%. So you have to have a whole lot of eggs to end up with just a few adult butterflies. So again, maybe 10 out of every 100 eggs might make it to be an adult butterfly. And so some of the parasites that we've been studying, so there's certainly lots of predators that will eat monarchs in the field. Assassin bugs and wasps and things like that. But one of the parasites we've been studying that the kids talked about in their song is the tinted fly. And so the flies will lay their eggs on the monarch caterpillars. They'll hatch pretty rapidly, and then they'll burrow down into the caterpillars. And so you can see here where the caterpillar has died, and we've got some fly maggots that had emerged, and then we've got some fly pupa. So they were maggots that have already pupated, and then you will have flies later on. And so we've been looking at fly parasites in Oklahoma, and so during the fall we can have really high levels. Last year we had about 50% of our caterpillars were dying from flies. And so we think that's likely because there's not a whole lot of milkweed, and so the monarchs are really restricted to a small area, in particular in the fall. And then the other parasite that's a concern is Ophriocistes electroscura, which is just called OE, even in the scientific literature. And so for that one, it can kill the monarchs outright, but typically it just kind of impairs their flight ability, it shortens their lifespan. So here you can see, this is what we call a tape count sample. So these are the scales from the butterfly's abdomen. So they lose their scales naturally, so you can collect a sample. And then these little kind of line-shaped structures are spores. And so when the monarchs are infected, you can sample the adults and you can look at how heavy their infection is. And so when they have OE, they're not going to live as long, they're not going to be able to fly as well. And then when this female goes and lays an egg on a milkweed plant, she'll also leave some spores behind. And so the caterpillars will eat the spores and pass the infection along. So we generally think about the ones that are heavily infected aren't going to be able to survive the migration to Mexico. So we'll have infection levels that will build up over the breeding season, and then they'll decline because those monarchs won't make it to Mexico. So it'll kind of eliminate some of the infection from the population. And so those are two parasites that are a big concern for monarchs that may have contributed to their decline, depending on where you're at and what the conditions are like. And so back to our monarch laying an egg. So again, there's lots of different issues for monarchs. Again, the flies and OE being two of the more common ones that we've been studying in this area. So with that, I guess I can take a couple questions.
Are there any types of spores or parasites that would be a danger to humans that the monarch butterflies would spread?
No, there's nothing that would infect humans. So the spore, so it's a spore-forming protist, and so it only infects butterflies in the genus that monarchs. So it's the monarchs and queens, and so it won't even infect other butterflies that are less closely related to monarchs. So it's very specific to them.
That's Dracula.
Yeah, so I think I forgot to repeat the question, but whether the spores could infect humans or be a problem. Now, the flies are thought to be more of a generalist, so they likely infect other caterpillars, although there's not a lot of data because they have pretty high infections for monarchs. They're wondering if there's maybe a closer association with monarchs in particular.
Thank you.
Yes?
Why did they go to Mexico?
So the question was, why do they go to Mexico? And that's a good question and a difficult one. Thank you, Andrew. And so there's lots of different thoughts about migration and different animals and how far they migrate. So certainly in the context of parasites, they're leaving their parasites behind. So that would be one potential benefit of migration. And then they're moving to warmer areas, although it can be quite cold on the overwintering grounds, and there are storm events that will kill large numbers of monarchs from time to time. But yes, so definitely advantages to migration. Yes, Mark?
I think a better question is, why do they go to the U.S.?
Well, so certainly there's...
Tropical, subtropical genus.
Yes, so if you think about the other members that are other butterflies that are closely related, and there's milkweed in Mexico, so what's the advantage of moving farther north and flying long distances, and that's a great question as well. And there are monarchs in other parts of the world and even monarchs in the U.S. that don't have that long distance migration. So the one population we talk about is the Eastern North American population, and they're the ones that pretty much cover the whole eastern half of the U.S. and the central part, and they migrate to Mexico. There is a western monarch population that will migrate a short distance and overwinter in California, but they stay in the U.S. the entire time. And then there's also a small population in South Florida that stays year-round and breeds. And there's concern about monarchs staying year-round, for example, in the Gulf Coast of Texas, where milkweed is available year-round because of people planting milkweed that's not native in their gardens. So if you're, as Mark mentioned, the non-native milkweeds are going to not survive in winter, so it's not an issue for us here. But yes?
Would it have anything to do with the diversity for changing conditions, diversity of the species to have different environmental conditions to be able to adapt to those conditions?
So the question was, I guess, still along the lines of migration and whether they're adapting to different conditions along that migration route. And so certainly thinking about how environmental conditions are changing. So if temperatures are getting warmer, then are they going to be moving farther north? So the thought is the reason we don't have monarchs, for example, during July and early August is the temperatures are a lot hotter, and so they're thought to not develop as well, so it'll slow down their development. Some years we will see monarchs, so whether changing conditions might influence the migration and where they're at different times would be a good question, but there's certainly, and they tend to, if you think about the timing of migration, it follows just a little bit behind when the milkweed starts to emerge as well. Yes?
So are the flies resistant to the toxins in the milkweed?
So the question was, are the flies resistant to the toxins? And the flies don't seem to have any issues with the toxins in the milkweed. The exact mechanism, I don't know. But and a lot of the other predators, so for example, wasps and other types of insects that eat the monarchs are able to handle those toxins as well. So it kind of depends. But for example, and there are some birds, for example, in the overwintering grounds that also do focus on monarchs, but there's lots of other ones where they are toxic and they won't consume them after they try one time.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to bring the children back out and have them stand up here with the scientists in case any of the parents want to take a group picture real quick. We have door prizes tonight. We have 10 door prizes, so stick around, don't leave. We're going to draw tickets for the door prizes. Also, there are evaluation forms at every place in the room. Those are really important to us, so please take a minute and fill those out for us. We'll use those as we plan future programs. We'll share them with our speakers, and they'll be very, very helpful for us to have those. So please fill those out. I'm going to get out of the way.
I just want to say thank you to all the parents who made this possible by bringing their kids. Can we give them all a big round of applause?